Break through the noise of the digital age and see the world with a silver vision that highlights every truth. We redefine the art of digital storytelling by showing you the hidden side of the human heart. Subscribe today and start seeing the world through our lens.
Sign these papers, or I'm calling your employer. My husband's family tried to steal the $400,000 my grandmother left me. I smiled, picked up the pen, and said, "Perfect. Let's begin." My mother-in-law didn't greet me at the door. She just stepped aside to let me in, the way you step aside for a delivery you've been waiting on. Not a person, a package. I walked into the house where my husband grew up, and I already knew what was on the table before I saw it. I could feel it the way you feel a storm before the sky changes color. Before I tell you what I did when I saw those papers, I want to ask you something. Drop a comment and tell me what's the most valuable thing someone in your family tried to take from you. Not just money, anything. I'm reading every single one. I set my bag down by the door. My name is Nora. I'm 31 years old. I'm a licensed estate paralegal, and for the last 6 years of my marriage, I have watched my husband's family treat the concept of what's mine like a suggestion written in pencil. But that evening, sitting across from my mother-in-law Patricia and my father-in-law Douglas, I understood that the pencil had finally run out of eraser. The papers were in a manila folder in the center of the dining room table. Next to them was a plate of cookies Patricia had clearly bought from a grocery store and arranged on her own dish, the way people do when they want credit for effort they didn't make. There was also a glass of water already poured for me, which somehow made it worse. The staging of it, the performance. My husband Garrett sat at the far end of the table. He didn't look at me when I walked in. That told me everything I needed to know about who had been briefed and who had been ambushed. Patricia clasped her hands on the table. She smiled the way she always smiled, with her mouth doing all the work and her eyes staying completely still. "Nora," she said, "we're so glad you came. We wanted to do this as a family." I sat down. I looked at the folder. I didn't open it yet. "What is this?" I asked, even though I already knew. Douglas leaned forward. He was a large man who had spent 30 years in commercial real estate and believed that proximity was a form of pressure. He had a habit of leaning into conversations to remind you that he was bigger than you. "It's a restructuring agreement," he said, "for the house." The house in question was not their house. It was my grandmother's house, a 3-bedroom craftsman in a suburb of Portland that my grandmother, Miriam, had owned outright since 1987. She passed away 4 months ago, on a Tuesday morning in late October, with her cat on her lap and her favorite radio station playing in the kitchen. She left the house to me. Just me. Sole beneficiary. Clearly named in a will that her attorney had notarized, witnessed, and filed correctly. There was no ambiguity. There was no loophole. There was just a house worth approximately $400,000, a set of keys on a sunflower keychain, and a family who had been looking at that number since the reading of the will, like a window they were planning to break. "What kind of restructuring?" I asked. Patricia opened the folder herself and slid it across the table toward me. It was a quitclaim deed transferring 50% ownership of the property to Douglas and Patricia, along with a document I recognized immediately as a family loan agreement, a retroactive one, claiming that Douglas and Patricia had loaned Garrett and me $40,000 over the course of our marriage for various expenses, and that repayment would be satisfied by the partial property transfer. I looked at the documents for a long moment. Then I looked up. "We've been so supportive of you both," Patricia said. "The wedding, the down payment assistance, helping when things were tight. We never asked for anything back. But now that there's an asset in the family, it only seems fair that—" "It's Miriam's house," I said. "It will be part of the family estate," Douglas corrected, "which means it belongs to all of us, in the spirit of—" "It's in my name," I said. "Legally. Solely." Garrett finally looked at me. His expression was not apologetic. It was the look of someone who had already decided something and was waiting for me to catch up. "That's actually what we wanted to discuss," Patricia said, folding her hands again. "We've spoken with an attorney." Here it was. "And he believes that because you acquired this asset during the marriage, Garrett may have a marital interest claim, especially if you were to divorce." The word divorce landed on the table between us like something dropped from a height. I didn't flinch. I'd been a paralegal for 8 years. I had watched people weaponize legal language across conference tables more times than I could count. I knew what a marital interest claim actually required. I also knew that Oregon is not a community property state, and that inherited assets received solely by one spouse are generally protected, especially when the deceased had explicitly excluded all other parties in writing. But I didn't say any of that. Because here is the thing about people who use legal threats as leverage. They are counting on you to either fight back immediately, which lets them dig in, or to crumble, which lets them win. What they don't prepare for is someone who does neither. Someone who just listens and takes notes and lets them believe they are winning right up until the moment the window closes. I picked up the water glass Patricia had poured for me. I took a sip. I said, "Can you walk me through the loan agreement? Which expenses are itemized?" Douglas blinked. He hadn't expected a question. He expected an argument or a surrender. He shuffled the papers. There were several items listed, vague ones. Wedding florals, emergency assistance, 2019 car repair. Nothing with a receipt attached, nothing with a date specific enough to verify. The total was listed as $40,000, but the line items added up to less than half of that. Someone had padded the number and assumed I wouldn't notice. I nodded slowly. "I see," I said. "And this is the first time you're presenting this?" "We didn't want to burden you," Patricia said smoothly. "But given the circumstances—" "I understand," I said. "I need a few days to review this with my own attorney before I sign anything." The temperature in the room dropped. Douglas's jaw tightened. "We were hoping to resolve this tonight," he said. I smiled. "I understand, but I'm sure your attorney told you that signing a quitclaim deed is a permanent action. I'd be doing us both a disservice if I rushed it." Patricia looked at Garrett. Something passed between them, the look of people who had rehearsed a conversation and just had it go off script. Garrett spoke for the first time. "Nora, this is about our future. The house is a significant asset, and my parents have done a lot for us. It's not unreasonable to—" "Has your name ever been on my grandmother's mortgage?" I asked. He stopped. "Did you ever pay her property taxes? Did you mow her lawn? Take her to her appointments? Sit with her when she was in the hospital?" I did all of that. For 6 years. I visited every other week. I drove 2 hours each way. I sat with her during her last 3 months. She left me that house because she wanted me to have it. Not because I'm your wife, because I was her family. Garrett looked away. Patricia's voice sharpened. "We're not trying to take anything from you, Nora. We're trying to be fair." I've never understood that particular sentence, "we're trying to be fair," said by the person who is actively trying to take something from you. Fairness, in that usage, means, you have something we want, and we'd like you to feel morally obligated to hand it over without making a scene. I closed the folder. "I'll have these reviewed by Friday," I said. That's when Patricia picked up her phone and set it on the table. "Screen up. The way people do when they want you to know they have a card left to play. I want you to think carefully," she said. "Garrett has already spoken to a divorce attorney. If you refuse to cooperate with this agreement, he'll file. And I promise you, the legal fees alone will cost you more than 50% of that property's value. You'll spend 3 years fighting, and by the end, you'll have nothing." She paused to let it land. "Or," she continued, "you sign tonight, we keep this in the family, everyone moves forward." There it was, not a family dinner, an ambush. Garrett had already filed paperwork, or at least, they wanted me to believe he had. The manila folder had been planned, the loan agreement had been fabricated, the attorney consultation had been weaponized, and the woman across from me was not my mother-in-law. She was the architect of it. I sat with that for a moment. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about the last conversation we had, 3 days before she died. She had taken my hand and told me that she'd watched my marriage for years and that she was leaving me the house because she wanted me to have something that was only mine, something no one else could make a claim on. She said, "You've been giving pieces of yourself away your whole marriage, Nora. Keep this one. It's yours." I had cried. I had told her I loved her. I had meant it. I looked at Patricia's phone on the table. I looked at Garrett's profile as he stared at the wall. I looked at Douglas's hands, flat on the table, waiting. And then I felt something shift in my chest. Not fear, not anger, something cleaner than both of those. Clarity. "You're right," I said. "Legal fees would be expensive, and stressful, and very public." Patricia relaxed slightly. "Good. Then, on both sides," I said. Her smile didn't waver, but something behind her eyes did. I opened my bag and took out a legal pad. Not because I needed to write anything. Because I wanted them to see me take notes. People who carry legal pads into family dinners are not people who crumble. "Tell me about the $40,000 loan," I said. "Specifically the 2019 car repair." "Which car?" Douglas frowned. "What? You listed a car repair for $4,200 in 2019. Garrett drives a truck. My car was a Honda I paid for myself, which I still have the title on. Dated 2017, purchased in full. So I'm curious which vehicle this repair was for." Douglas glanced at Patricia. It was the look of two people who made something up and are now being asked to describe it. "I think it was," he started. "Don't guess," I said pleasantly. Because if we're going to present this to a judge, we need to be precise. The word judge changed the energy in the room. Patricia leaned forward. Nora, this doesn't need to go to a judge. That's the whole point of... You're right, I said. It doesn't. But I want you to understand something. I have worked in estate law for 8 years. I have helped clients protect inherited assets from exactly this kind of claim. I know what documentation is required to establish a marital interest in inherited property in Oregon. I know what constitutes a valid loan agreement versus a retroactive financial narrative. And I know that this folder, I tapped it with one finger, doesn't contain a single document that was created before tonight. Silence. I continued. I also want to be transparent. I made copies of my grandmother's complete estate file before I came here tonight. Her original will, the notarized amendments, the attorney correspondence, the deed transfer, and the letter she wrote me explaining her intent. I scanned everything and sent it to my attorney this afternoon, along with a summary of what I believed this meeting was going to be about. Patricia's composure cracked by exactly 1 millimeter. How did you know? Because Garrett called his brother from our kitchen last Thursday, I said. And our kitchen has an open floor plan. I hadn't planned to reveal that yet, but I watched her process it, the timeline, the realization that I had been preparing while she was still finalizing the folder, and I let the silence do the work. Douglas stood up. He was using his height again. Nora, I don't appreciate the implication that we fabricated. I'm not implying anything, I said, keeping my voice level and my back straight. I'm asking for documentation to support a claim you're making on inherited property. That's not an accusation. It's a legal process. If the documentation exists, this is a very simple conversation. If it doesn't, then we have a very different conversation. He sat back down. I looked at Garrett. He was staring at the table. In 6 years of marriage, I had learned to read him the way you learn to read weather. The set of his shoulders told me he hadn't been fully told what was in the folder. He'd been told there was a plan. He'd agreed to it in the abstract way people agree to things when they've been raised to defer to their parents. But the specifics, the fabricated loan amounts, the quitclaim, the threat about divorce, those were Patricia's. He was a participant, but he wasn't the author. I'm going to say something now, I said, and I'm going to say it once. Garrett, your parents asked you to be part of something that could constitute fraud. The loan agreement in that folder lists transactions that didn't happen. If you sign that document as a party to the agreement, and if it is later used in any legal proceeding, you could be held personally liable. I'm not saying this to threaten you. I'm saying it because you're still my husband, and you deserve to know. Patricia made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Garrett looked at me for the first time all evening. His face was complicated. I understand that this family has its own logic, I continued. I understand that you've all made agreements among yourselves about what's fair, but my grandmother's house is not part of that logic. She was not part of this family in any legal sense. She was my family, and what she left me is mine. I closed my legal pad. I'm going to leave now, I said. I'm not signing anything tonight. My attorney will be in contact about the fraudulent loan document by Monday. If Garrett genuinely wants to pursue a divorce, he's free to do so, and I will respond through proper legal channels. But I want to be very clear about one thing. I looked at Patricia. If this family attempts to file any claim against my grandmother's estate, I will ensure that the original will, the letter of intent, and the attorney's notes about this specific situation are part of the public record. My grandmother's attorney anticipated a challenge. That's why he documented everything so thoroughly. There is a reason she named me as the sole beneficiary, and there is a letter in his files explaining it in detail. Patricia's voice was quiet now. What does the letter say? That she didn't trust you with her legacy, I said. Her words, not mine. She wrote that letter 2 years ago. She was very clear. I picked up my bag. I took the manila folder. Evidence, I said simply. I walked out of that house. I sat in my car for 6 minutes before I started the engine. I didn't cry. I had already done my crying in my grandmother's kitchen, in her hospital room, in the driveway of the house on the morning after the funeral. When I walked through every room and understood that she was really gone, I had used up my grief in the right places. I didn't have any left over for people who had turned her death into a transaction. My phone buzzed 4 times before I reached the end of the block. 3 from Patricia, 1 from Douglas. I drove home. My attorney's name is Richard, and he has been my professional mentor for 5 years. I called him from the parking lot of my apartment building. I told him what had happened. There was a pause, and then he said, "Did you take the folder?" And I said yes. And he said, "Good girl. I'll have a cease and desist drafted by Sunday night." On Friday, the cease and desist was delivered to Douglas and Patricia's home address. It cited the fraudulent loan agreement, the attempted coercion, and the misrepresentation of marital property law. It also included a copy of my grandmother's letter of intent, which her attorney had agreed to release given the circumstances. Garrett called me that night. He said he hadn't known about the loan document, that his mother had told him it was just a formality, that she had told him the numbers were real. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "I should have asked to see it before the meeting." He was right. He should have. I told him that if he still wanted to dissolve the marriage, I would not fight him. But I would also not be participating in any claim against my grandmother's house, and any attempt to do so would be met with the full documentation we had already compiled. He said he understood. He apologized. I told him that sorry was a starting point, not a destination. 3 weeks later, he filed not for divorce. He filed for legal separation and requested a mediator rather than a litigator. I accepted. The separation agreement was drafted without his parents' involvement, at his insistence. Patricia and Douglas did consult an attorney about a marital interest claim. Their attorney, to his credit, told them they had no viable case given the documentation and the letter of intent. They did not file. The house in Portland is mine. I've repainted the kitchen the same yellow my grandmother always wanted but never got around to. I put the sunflower keychain on a hook by the front door, where I can see it every morning. Last month, I went through the last of her boxes in the back bedroom. At the bottom of a storage bin, wrapped in a dish towel, I found a card she had written for me. The envelope said, "Open when you need to remember you're stronger than you think you are." I opened it. She had written 3 sentences. I'm not going to share what they said. Some things aren't for anyone else. But I will say that she knew. She had always known. And she made sure that everything she left behind would hold up legally, morally, completely, because she understood the people I would have to face to keep it. I folded the card and put it in the drawer of the nightstand in the bedroom that used to be hers. This is my house now. I'm not going anywhere. And if you have someone in your life who left you something that belongs to you, hold on to it. Get the documentation. Know your rights. And remember that love, when it's real, leaves a paper trail.